The massive Imperial diplomatic vessel cast a shadow over the United Earth Government headquarters in Geneva, its gleaming hull reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside the building's main conference room, 6 alien representatives stood tall, their ceremonial armor catching the light from the windows. They looked down at the assembled human delegation with what could only be described as contempt. "Your species continues to resist the benefits of joining our empire," the lead ambassador said, his translator making his voice sound like grinding metal. "This defiance cannot continue. We propose a solution from our ancient laws." The humans at the table exchanged worried glances. Earth's military forces were strong, but everyone knew they couldn't withstand the full might of an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. "What kind of solution?" asked the Earth president, trying to keep her voice steady. The alien ambassador's mouth parts twitched in what might have been a smile. "Trial by combat. Our greatest warriors against your chosen champion. If you win, we will leave your solar system and grant you true independence. If we win, Earth joins the Empire without further resistance." 3 kilometers away, in the spaceport's maintenance bay, Tom Miller was having the worst day of his career. The Imperial ship's flashy arrival had created an electromagnetic pulse that fried half the cooling systems he was responsible for maintaining. Now he had 12 ships that needed repairs before they could safely take off. Stupid fancy alien ships with their stupid poorly shielded energy drives, he muttered, banging away at a stuck valve with his favorite wrench. It was an old-fashioned adjustable wrench, passed down from his grandfather who had maintained the first Mars colonies. The thing was practically indestructible and had never failed him. The intercom crackled. "Maintenance Bay 7, this is Control. We need you to check the Imperial ship's docking clamps. They're reporting some kind of technical issue." Tom threw his wrench into his toolbox with a clang. "Of course they are, because their fancy ship couldn't possibly have anything to do with our systems failing. Sure, send the human to fix it. Not like I have 12 other ships to repair." He grabbed his toolbox and stomped toward the Imperial vessel's bay, his boots leaving oily footprints on the clean floor. As he approached, he could see the problem immediately. The idiots had tried to interface their advanced docking system with the spaceport's standard clamps without using a proper adapter. "Hey," he shouted at the Imperial guards. "Who's the genius who thought it was a good idea to force connect a Type 7 energy coupling to a standard Earth clamp? You're lucky you didn't blow up half the spaceport." The guards looked at each other uncertainly. One of them raised a translating device. "This area is restricted. The Empire's finest warriors are preparing for ritual combat." Tom ignored them, pushing past to examine the damaged coupling. "Warriors, whatever. Someone needs to fix this before your fancy ship tears a hole in my docking bay. Look at this mess. The safety interlocks are completely fried." Inside the ship, the Imperial warriors were indeed preparing, donning their ceremonial armor and charging their energy weapons. They paid no attention to the commotion outside until one of the guards rushed in. "My lords," the guard said, bowing, "there's a human technician who demands access to the docking system. He says." A loud clang interrupted him, followed by the sound of machinery powering down. The ship's artificial gravity flickered. "There." Tom's voice carried through the hull. "Now it won't explode. You're welcome. And next time, read the bloody manual before you dock at my spaceport." The warriors looked at each other in confusion as the human's footsteps stomped away, accompanied by a steady stream of complaints about proper maintenance procedures. Little did any of them know that in the conference room, Earth's delegates were desperately trying to find a champion, and Tom Miller's name was about to come up in a very unexpected way. Tom was elbow-deep in a coolant pipe when his supervisor found him. The older man looked nervous, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. "Tom, you need to come with me right now," he said, his voice shaking. "The Earth Council wants to see you." "Tell them I'm busy," Tom replied, not looking up from his work. "I've still got 8 ships that need repairs after that mess their fancy vessel caused." "Tom, they're saying it's about saving Earth. 5 minutes later, Tom stood in the Grand Council chamber, still wearing his oil-stained coveralls and holding his toolbox. The Earth's highest officials stared at him with desperate hope, while the Imperial representatives looked like they'd swallowed something sour. "This is your champion?" the lead Imperial warrior asked, mandibles clicking in disbelief. "A maintenance worker." "Engineering specialist," Tom corrected, setting down his toolbox with a heavy clank. "And I'd really like to get back to work. Those coolant systems won't fix themselves." The Earth President stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, we've chosen you because of your unique interaction with the Imperial ship earlier today. The rules of ritual combat state that we must choose someone who has already shown dominance over Imperial technology." "I didn't show dominance," Tom protested. "I just fixed their badly installed docking clamp before it could blow up my spaceport." "Exactly," one of the council members said excitedly. "You understood and repaired their advanced technology without any training or manuals." The Imperial warriors huddled together, speaking in harsh whispers. Finally, their leader turned back to the council. "The ancient laws are clear. Once named, a champion cannot be withdrawn unless they are physically incapable of combat. However, this mechanic must follow the sacred rules of engagement." Tom raised an eyebrow. "What rules?" A hologram appeared in the center of the room, showing various exotic weapons and armor. "Each warrior will face you in single combat in our ceremonial arena. You may choose any weapons or armor from your world's arsenal." "Right," Tom said, picking up his toolbox. "I'll stick with what I've got." The Imperial warriors stared at him. "You intend to fight with maintenance tools?" "This isn't just any wrench," Tom said, holding up his favorite tool. "My grandfather used it to build the first Mars colony. Never failed him. Never failed me." The Imperial delegation erupted in protests. Their translator struggled to keep up as multiple aliens spoke at once about sacred traditions and dishonoring the combat ritual. "Mr. Miller," the Earth President whispered urgently, "maybe you should consider some actual weapons. The fate of our planet depends on this." Tom looked at his wrench, then at the Imperial warriors with their glowing armor and humming energy weapons. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been fixing complicated machines since I was old enough to hold a screwdriver, and from what I've seen of their technology so far, they could really use someone who knows the difference between a power coupling and a docking clamp." The lead Imperial warrior stepped forward, looming over Tom. "You mock our sacred combat ritual." "No," Tom replied, meeting the alien's four eyes steadily. "I'm just saying that fancy weapons don't mean much if you don't maintain them properly. And judging by what I saw in the docking bay, you folks could use a lesson in basic maintenance." The warrior's face turned an interesting shade of purple. "You will regret this insolence, human. The combat begins at dawn tomorrow. I suggest you get your affairs in order." Tom shrugged, picked up his toolbox, and turned to leave. "Sure, but first I need to finish fixing those coolant systems. Don't want the spaceport exploding while we're having your ritual combat, do we?" As he walked out, the Earth Council members looked at each other in mixed terror and hope. The Imperial warriors watched him go with expressions ranging from outrage to confusion. None of them noticed that Tom had spent the entire meeting studying the weak points in their ceremonial armor's joint servos. The Imperial Combat Arena was a massive structure that had been assembled overnight in the middle of Geneva's largest park. Tom arrived just before dawn, carrying his toolbox and drinking coffee from a battered thermos. He'd spent most of the night finishing repairs on the spaceport's cooling systems, much to the Earth Council's dismay. "You should have been preparing for combat," one of the council members hissed as Tom approached the arena entrance. "I was," Tom replied, taking another sip of coffee. "Those ships needed fixing, and I had time to think while I worked." "Did you know their fancy energy weapons used the same kind of power coupling they try to attach to our docking clamps?" Before the council member could respond, a thunderous horn blasted across the arena. The first Imperial warrior stepped out onto the combat floor, his armor gleaming in the morning sun. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in biomechanical battle gear that hummed with energy. "I am War Master First Class Kron," the warrior announced through his translator. "I have conquered 17 worlds in single combat. Prepare yourself, human maintenance worker." Tom set down his coffee and toolbox. "You know, that armor of yours is making a weird noise. The left shoulder servo sounds out of alignment." The warrior paused. "What?" "Yeah, that whining sound. Classic sign of poor maintenance. Bet it's been sticking during training, right?" Kron's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "The sacred combat begins now." He activated his energy shield, a shimming blue barrier surrounding him, and drew his plasma sword with a dramatic flourish. Tom reached into his toolbox and pulled out a handful of metal shavings, leftovers from his night of repairs. "Might want to power down that shield first. Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate my defenses." Kron charged forward, plasma sword raised high. Tom threw the metal shavings into the air. They scattered across the energy shield, which tried to repel each tiny piece individually. The shield's matrix overloaded, trying to track too many small objects at once. With a spectacular pop, it shorted out. Kron stumbled, his armor's systems flickering. That was when Tom stepped forward and jammed his wrench into the warrior's already misaligned shoulder joint. "See," Tom said as he twisted the wrench. "Told you that servo was loose." The entire left arm of Kron's battle suit went dead, the plasma sword powering down and dropping from useless fingers. The warrior stared in shock as Tom proceeded to systematically disable each major joint in the armor, moving with the swift efficiency of someone who had spent decades taking apart complicated machinery. "This is impossible," Kron shouted, his translator glitching. "This is advanced Imperial technology." "Yeah," Tom agreed, now removing a key power coupling from the back of the armor. "Advanced technology that nobody's properly maintained. When's the last time you had this suit serviced? Look at this power coupling. It's completely corroded. You're lucky it didn't fail during battle." The warrior tried to move, but his armor had completely locked up. I yield." Tom stepped back, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Smart choice. Now, want me to show you how to properly maintain this suit? Because whoever's been doing your maintenance has been doing a terrible job." The arena was silent. In the viewing stands, the Imperial delegation sat in shocked disbelief. The Earth's representatives weren't sure whether to cheer or faint. Tom picked up his coffee and took another sip. "Also, you might want to check the other warriors' armor. I noticed they're all using the same faulty power coupling design. That's the problem with standardized equipment. If one has a flaw, they all do." As medical teams helped remove Kron's locked-up armor, Tom pulled out a rag and started cleaning his wrench. "Anyone else need their equipment checked? Might as well make good use of the time while we're all here." The remaining Imperial warriors looked at their own armor with newfound concern. In the back of the arena, one of them quietly tried to run a diagnostic on his plasma sword. While waiting for his next combat match, Tom couldn't sit still. The arena's environmental control system was making a noise that set his teeth on edge. It wasn't the normal hum of properly functioning machinery, but the wheezing groan of equipment being pushed beyond its limits. "This whole place is a maintenance nightmare," he muttered, opening an access panel behind the waiting area. The Imperial technicians watching him didn't try to stop him anymore. They'd learned it was useless after his third emergency repair between matches. "What are you doing now, human?" asked one of the younger Imperial warriors who was scheduled to fight him later that day. "Fixing your ventilation system before it fails," Tom replied, head deep in the panel. "Whoever installed this mixed up the primary and secondary coolant lines. You're lucky the whole thing hasn't overheated yet." The warrior moved closer, curiosity overcoming his trained hostility. "But how can you understand our technology? You're from a primitive world." Tom emerged from the panel, his face smeared with alien coolant. "Machines are machines. They all follow the same basic rules. If something spins, it needs bearings. If it moves, it needs lubrication. If it uses power, it needs proper circulation to prevent overheating. He pointed to a diagram on the wall. Like this, your people wrote it backwards to be fancy, but it's still just a basic hydraulic system. More warriors gathered around as Tom worked. They watched in silence as he rerouted coolant lines, replaced worn seals, and cleaned clogged filters. The temperature in the arena, which had been steadily rising throughout the morning, began to stabilize. There, Tom said, closing the panel. Now it won't explode. Explode? One of the warriors asked, alarmed. Figure of speech. Probably would have just caught fire. Tom wiped his hands on his coveralls. You know, for an advanced civilization, you folks really need to work on your maintenance protocols. Basic upkeep isn't exactly optional, even with fancy tech. An older warrior stepped forward, his armor bearing marks of many battles. In the Empire, warriors do not concern themselves with maintenance. That is for the lower castes. And how's that working out for you? Tom asked, gesturing at the pile of disabled armor from his previous matches. Because from what I've seen, your lower castes either don't know what they're doing or don't care enough to do it right. The warriors shifted uncomfortably. One of them quietly powered down his armor shield generator, which had started making the same whining noise Tom had pointed out in his first match. Look, Tom said, pulling out his grandfather's wrench. This isn't some fancy piece of technology. It's just steel and good engineering. But it works because I maintain it. Clean it after every use. Check for stress damage. Lubricate the moving parts. Had it for 20 years, and it's never failed me. He looked at the warrior's expensive armor. Can you say the same about your equipment? A murmur went through the gathered aliens. Several of them were now examining their own gear with critical eyes. Perhaps, the older warrior said slowly, there is wisdom in understanding one's tools. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Tom replied, already distracted by another concerning sound from deeper in the arena. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think your main power distributor is about to fail. Whoever wired this place must have learned electronics from a picture book. As he walked away, toolbox in hand, the Imperial warriors looked at each other with new understanding. They had come expecting to face a primitive opponent, but instead found someone who could take apart their most advanced technology with nothing but basic tools and practical knowledge. In the command center above the arena, the Imperial generals watched the scene with growing concern. Their warriors weren't just losing fights, they were starting to question the very foundations of their military doctrine. By midday, the pattern was impossible to ignore. 3 more Imperial warriors had faced Tom, and 3 more sets of advanced combat armor lay disabled in the maintenance bay. Tom had stopped by to check on them between matches, muttering about wasteful practices and voided warranties. The human doesn't fight, observed High Commander Dax from the command center. He repairs. Or unrepairs, another officer added, watching Tom systematically disassemble a fallen warrior's plasma rifle. How does he know where all the weak points are? Below, Tom was explaining to a group of fascinated Imperial technicians why their power distribution system was backwards. Look, you're running too much energy through these secondary conduits. They're not meant for that kind of load. That's why your weapons keep overheating. One of the technicians raised a hand. But the sacred texts say. The sacred texts didn't have to deal with basic thermodynamics. Tom interrupted, pulling out a worn notebook. Here, I drew up a diagram of how it should work. See. Simple flow chart. Power goes from big pipes to small pipes, not the other way around. The technicians huddled around his notebook, their own tablets forgotten. One of them gasped. This would improve efficiency by at least 40%. Yeah, and it wouldn't blow up in your face during combat, Tom added, which seems like a pretty important feature for a weapon, if you ask me. In the warriors' preparation chamber, the remaining fighters were having a crisis of confidence. They watched through view screens as Tom turned their most advanced technology into teaching materials for basic engineering principles. Our greatest weapons are just machines, One warrior whispered in horror, "Machines that this human knows better than we do." Another added, looking at his plasma sword with new uncertainty. The next warrior to face Tom was young and nervous. His armor was the latest model, supposedly improved based on the earlier matches. He activated all his defensive systems at once, determined not to give the human mechanic any opening. Tom looked at the warrior's feet. "Your stabilizers are out of sync." "What?" "No, this is the newest." "Yeah, and whoever installed the gyros did it backwards. Your left foot is about half a second behind your right. Must make it hard to turn quickly." The warrior tried to prove him wrong with a rapid spin move. His left leg locked up, sending him stumbling. Before he could recover, Tom was already there with his wrench, quickly detaching key components from the armor's joints. "See these connection points?" Tom said as he disabled the suit. "They're all standardized. Same basic design across your whole empire, just dressed up differently. Once you understand the basic principles, it's all pretty straightforward." The young warrior yielded quickly, more interested in Tom's impromptu lesson than continuing the fight. As maintenance crews helped him out of his locked armor, he joined the growing crowd of warriors and technicians taking notes on Tom's explanations. In the command center, the High Commander leaned back in his chair. "The human isn't just beating our warriors. He's showing them why they're losing." "This is worse than defeat," his aide said. "He's making our most advanced technology look primitive." "No," the commander corrected, watching Tom draw another diagram for his eager audience. "He's showing us that we've forgotten something important. We became so focused on advancing our technology that we forgot the basic principles it's built on." Below, Tom was opening another access panel, his audience growing larger with each passing hour. "Now, who wants to learn about proper preventive maintenance schedules? Trust me, it'll change your life." The Empire's greatest warriors gathered around a human with a wrench and a notebook, pulled out their data tablets, and began to take notes. The sun was setting when the Empire's champion finally arrived. The massive combat mech stomped into the arena, casting long shadows across the ground. It stood 12 meters tall, bristling with weapons, and covered in armor that gleamed with energy fields. Tom looked up from where he was teaching a group of Imperial technicians about proper tool organization. "Oh, come on. Who designed that thing? The power-to-weight ratio is all wrong." The mech's cockpit opened, revealing Supreme Battle Master Grix, the Empire's most decorated warrior. His voice boomed through external speakers. "I designed it myself. This is the pinnacle of Imperial combat technology." "Really?" Tom pointed with his wrench. "Then why is your primary hydraulic line exposed? And those knee joints aren't properly braced. And," he squinted, "is that smoke coming from the left shoulder? Please tell me you're not running a Mark IV power core in a Mark III frame." Grix's confident expression faltered slightly. "The Mark IV core provides superior power. The Mark III frame can't handle that kind of output." Tom was practically shouting now. "The heat distribution system isn't rated for it. Did nobody read the specifications?" In the viewing stands, Imperial engineers were frantically checking their tablets, faces growing pale. One of them tried to signal Grix, but the champion was already activating his weapon systems. "Enough talk," Grix declared. "Face your doom, human maintenance worker." The mech's arms raised, weapon ports opening. Tom shook his head and reached into his toolbox, pulling out a small device he'd built during his lunch break using spare parts from the arena's ventilation system. "I really wouldn't fire those weapons if I were you," Tom warned. "Not with that power core running that hot." Grix fired anyway. Nothing happened. The weapon ports sparked and went dark. "What did you do?" Grix demanded, hitting controls frantically. "Me? Nothing yet." Tom held up his device. "This just measures heat output. And according to these readings, your power core is about 30 seconds from an emergency shutdown. Might want to power down before." The mech's lights flickered and died. It froze in mid-step, teetering dangerously. "That happens," Tom finished. Now, unless you want that thing to fall over and crush half the arena, I suggest you let me help. For a moment, there was silence. Then Grix's voice came through again, much quieter. Please help. Tom spent the next 20 minutes directing a team of Imperial engineers and technicians in safely powering down the mech. He climbed all over the massive machine, pointing out safety violations and design flaws, teaching as he worked. See this, he said, holding up a burned-out component. This is what happens when you try to push more power than your systems can handle. It's not about having the most powerful core. It's about having all your systems working together properly. Grix emerged from the cockpit, looking humbled. But the sacred texts say more power is always better. The sacred texts need an update on basic engineering principles, Tom replied, handing him the burnt component. You can have all the power in the universe, but if you can't maintain it properly, it's just a really expensive way to fail. The Imperial champion looked at his massive, disabled war machine, then at Tom's simple wrench and toolbox. I yield the combat. We all yield. You haven't just defeated us, you've taught us. Tom was already examining the mech's hydraulic system. Great. Now, who wants to learn about proper maintenance schedules for large combat platforms? Because this thing needs serious work, and we might as well make it a teaching opportunity. The gathered crowd of Imperial warriors, engineers, and technicians raised their hands as one. Even Grix pulled out a tablet, ready to take notes. In the command center, the High Commander smiled for the first time since the combat began. Perhaps, he said softly, this defeat is actually our greatest victory. The Imperial combat arena was a massive structure that had been assembled overnight in the middle of Geneva's largest park. Tom arrived just before dawn, carrying his toolbox and drinking coffee from a battered thermos. He'd spent most of the night finishing repairs on the spaceport's cooling systems, much to the Earth Council's dismay. You should have been preparing for combat, one of the council members hissed as Tom approached the arena entrance. I was, Tom replied, taking another sip of coffee. Those ships needed fixing, and I had time to think while I worked. Did you know their fancy energy weapons used the same kind of power coupling they try to attach to our docking clamps? Before the council member could respond, a thunderous horn blasted across the arena. The first Imperial warrior stepped out onto the combat floor, his armor gleaming in the morning sun. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in biomechanical battle gear that hummed with energy. I am War Master First Class Kron, the warrior announced through his translator. I have conquered 17 worlds in single combat. Prepare yourself, human maintenance worker. Tom set down his coffee and toolbox. You know, that armor of yours is making a weird noise. The left shoulder servo sounds out of alignment. The warrior paused. What? Yeah, that whining sound. Classic sign of poor maintenance. Bet it's been sticking during training, right? Kron's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. The sacred combat begins now. He activated his energy shield, a shimming blue barrier surrounding him, and drew his plasma sword with a dramatic flourish. Tom reached into his toolbox and pulled out a handful of metal shavings, leftovers from his night of repairs. Might want to power down that shield first. Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate my defenses. Kron charged forward, plasma sword raised high. Tom threw the metal shavings into the air. They scattered across the energy shield, which tried to repel each tiny piece individually. The shield's matrix overloaded, trying to track too many small objects at once. With a spectacular pop, it shorted out. Kron stumbled, his armor's systems flickering. That was when Tom stepped forward and jammed his wrench into the warrior's already misaligned shoulder joint. See, Tom said as he twisted the wrench. Told you that servo was loose. The entire left arm of Kron's battle suit went dead, the plasma sword powering down and dropping from useless fingers. The warrior stared in shock as Tom proceeded to systematically disable each major joint in the armor, moving with the swift efficiency of someone who had spent decades taking apart complicated machinery. This is impossible, Kron shouted, his translator glitching. This is advanced Imperial technology. Yeah, Tom agreed, now removing a key power coupling from the back of the armor. Advanced technology that nobody's properly maintained. When's the last time you had this suit serviced? Look at this power coupling. It's completely corroded. You're lucky it didn't fail during battle. The warrior tried to move, but his armor had completely locked up. I yield. Tom stepped back, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Smart choice. Now, want me to show you how to properly maintain this suit? Because whoever's been doing your maintenance has been doing a terrible job. The arena was silent. In the viewing stands, the Imperial delegation sat in shocked disbelief. The Earth's representatives weren't sure whether to cheer or faint. Tom picked up his coffee and took another sip. Also, you might want to check the other warriors' armor. I noticed they're all using the same faulty power coupling design. That's the problem with standardized equipment. If one has a flaw, they all do. As medical teams helped remove Kron's locked-up armor, Tom pulled out a rag and started cleaning his wrench. Anyone else need their equipment checked? Might as well make good use of the time while we're all here. The remaining Imperial warriors looked at their own armor with newfound concern. In the back of the arena, one of them quietly tried to run a diagnostic on his plasma sword.